Here is Anthony Fauci on with Jake Tapper. When we hear that Donald Trump is spending Easter weekend asking around, like, what do you think about this Fauci guy? Should I get rid of him? Is he undercutting me? Even as he is helping with the medical health of the country? Well, here's a big part of the reason, because Fauci, he let the cat out of the bag, so to speak.
The New York Times reported yesterday that you and other top officials wanted to recommend social and physical distancing guidelines to President Trump as far back as the third week of February. But the administration didn't announce such guidelines to the American public until March 16th, almost a month later. Why?
You know, Jake, as I've said many times, we look at it from a pure health standpoint. We make a recommendation. Often the recommendation is taken. Sometimes it's not. But it is what it is. We are where we are right now.
Do you think lives could have been saved if social distancing, physical distancing, stay-at-home measures had started third week of February instead of mid-March?
You know, Jake, again, it's the what would have, what could have. It's very difficult to go back and say that. I mean, obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. But you're right. I mean, obviously, if we had right from the very beginning shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
I mean, Fauci is in a tough position here, insofar as I think he realizes that if he gets fired by Donald Trump, and that's always, I got to imagine, if you're working for him, a real possibility, that some lunatic could be brought in who just simply, and, you know, when Redfield was the sort of the lead on this from the CDC, he is a guy who was on the, was working on AIDS back in the day, and, thought like, I don't know, if you spray some type of religious, concoction on people, maybe they won't get AIDS. And I can imagine from Fauci's perspective, he's looking around and saying, if I get fired, the person who replaces me could end up basically being a patsy for these voices in the White House that only care about what the president's reelection numbers look like and are willing to take a risk that tens of thousands or more people could die to see if Donald Trump can get, some of his electoral mojo back. And so he's on there trying to be circumspect. And however, he's also a scientist, and he's asked like a very basic question, and it's very difficult for him, I think, to just completely lie about it. So he's just there basically saying, well, obviously, and if he was more of a politician, he could have said something to the effect of like, well, Jake, everything is always a trade-off. And, my job is to just always make the medical recommendation and not to assess, what the trade-off is going to be. And, but I don't want to say that there's anybody in the White House who is willing to have an extra 10, 30, 40, 50,000 deaths but the bottom line is this. Had we started this earlier, the ability to keep it in check would have been that much greater. The earlier you start on something, the better it is. And guys like Cuomo and de Blasio, to some extent, deserve criticism for not closing down New York City early enough. But in part, that's a function of the federal government not providing any type of 30,000-foot explanation. It would have been much harder for them to do this if the federal government is out there, saying there's no big deal.